So let me begin today with a blunt question. Can a nation change its morality overnight? That is the question. So do you think a nation can change its morality overnight? Okay, but England did. In 1649, it actually executes its own king, Charles I, and in 1660, it welcomed back his son with music, women, wine, and theater. That is how he is just represented with a sharp contrast to his own father. Charles I's son, is brought back to the throne of England after Oliver Cromwell's death, because after the execution of Charles I, Oliver Cromwell takes over as the England protector, though not as a king. But after the death of Oliver Cromwell, Charles II, that was his second son, Charles I's second son, who was in exile for some reason, that monarchy is returned. I mean, which means restored back in England. Now the monarchy, which was almost hated in England to the core, was brought back. So re-established. That is why this period is called Restoration. So restoration of English monarchy through Charles II. So you can see the facts here. In 1649, Charles I got executed because what did he do to get killed or executed? First, of course, he gets imprisoned. Then he was executed, killed, because he propagated the divine rights of the king. Never allowed any liberty to the parliament, English parliament, and imposed some unfair taxation on people, so that resulted in civil war. So in 1660, monarchy, as I told you, was restored under Charles II. So that is the name. So in order to connect you to this in a particular period, I have enlisted the chronological order of events here. So hence the restoration of kingship. It is, if you want to remember, you can remember these three words which are in bold and put in bold letters: regicides, republic, restoration. That is the order of events. Regicide means killing of the king. Republic, again, returning back to the kind of parliamentarian government or republic, or in fact, there was no king at all after the death of Charles I. Oliver Cromwell, though, was in that a position of a king. He was called England protector, and they had to wait for a few years till his death to bring back Charles' second son, Charles II. So that is restoration. So this marks the political and cultural revival of monarchy, as I have told you, where the king is the ultimate authority, monarchy, and theatre, courtly life after the Puritan interregnum means that that period after the Puritan period, where theatres were closed down, morality and moral laws were imposed on everybody, and any even the participation of women in performances, theatrical performance, was banned. So such were again brought back, which means again the theaters were opened, and there were freedom given to all the artists and artisans, and for the first time women came onto the stage to act. So in true sense, this was the restoration. So there was also a kind of condition on which came to the throne. He said he promised, in fact, to the parliament that he would pardon and he would tolerate, I mean, which means he excised that tolerance, and he would respect parliament. So in turn for this promise, England gives him the throne back. So the question is, if a king returns on a promise of pleasure, what kind of literature will rise? So that is a question to ponder over. That's a question to think about, because he came to the throne with a promise of pleasure, which means he granted freedom to everybody. Courtly love, courtly aesthetics, and poetry all thrived. Artists. So what kind of literature that it would produce in that situation? So obviously it is comedy of manners. So that would lead them to definitely satire, sex, and comedy. So this is Restoration Age and Comedy of Manners, what we have today for discussion, as it's been put here. Return of Charles. It is marked with return of Charles II in 1660. What are the significant events that happened? Theaters were reopened after Puritan ban because Puritanism no longer strong, or it just dismissed or put to the oblivion, pushed to the oblivion. So it has lost its rhythm. Shift from moral austerity to pleasure culture. So there is a bit of freedom or liberty granted, some kind of flexibility granted to everybody, no, unlike Puritan strict regime. So from sermon to satire, from strict church and religious prayers to satire, people would make comedy or perform kind of comic actions on stage, on write stories and talk about sex and other such things which were otherwise forbidden uh, during Puritan. So what was restored? Monarchy. So these things are net-worthy questions. Net-worthy in both the sense. Even if you take this as pun intended. Pun? Can somebody tell me what is pun? Your mics are on. You can also put it in message. These questions, points are net-worthy things. Pun intended, I said. So what do I mean by that?
Two different meanings.
Okay, two different meanings. Can you give me an example?
I mean, you just said net worthy. So it
Mm-hmm.
is for the exam net as well
Mm-hmm.
as it is, what do you say
The
that?
value, the
The
monetary
value.
value.
Huh,
Yeah.
huh.
Okay. Good. Good. So, of course, we'll take the second, meaning. Though I just wanted to test whether you could appreciate this stylistic device, use of stylistic device anyway. So, the monarchy, these questions, as I told you, these points are noteworthy because they often come in different guise. Different questions would be formed around these concepts. So, what was restored? Why was it called restoration period? It was because monarchy was restored. Public theaters were also restored in that sense because they were reopened, and court culture started gaining importance again, or there was a kind of liberty granted to all were part of this freedom of speech through all that comedy of humor. So sexual expression, people could write and talk about sexuality, sexual, even the language which articulated that freedom, and some to stage, from that Puritan religious sermon to stage performance. So these were the shift or restoration or restored things to remember. And anyway, this is again repeated, Puritan versus restoration. Though things are getting repeated, nothing wrong in keeping these things in your mind and let them enter deep into your memory. Puritan theaters were closed, and it was marked with moral rigidity. In fact, the theaters as a place were considered sinful. Women were in fact silent. Women were stripped of their all rights and liberty. Pleasure was suspect. So the focus was not on pleasure or something that was not to be talked in public. But restoration, open theaters, sexual interview, wit, satire, all that was brought onto the stage with all its glory. So cultural reversal after 18 years of Puritan rule. So that is the remarkable change that we get to see under Charles II. And as I told you in that while reading that previous slide, women stepped onto the stage for the first time, and desire also became fashionable. So in general, if you have to sum up, England moved from Bible to bedroom. So if it is not that raw and straightforward statement. So revolution in theater, the first point we discussed, and second, indoor proscenium theaters introduced. Proscenium means kind of space created, an extra space created near the curtain of the theaters, that is for the people to stand and give more clear prompts to the actors, so that the performance will be enhanced and made more clear to the audience. So elite audience replaced mass audience. That was another shift or change. So they were performed for elite class of people, and slowly this ordinary audience were driven out, and that is the beginning of modern theatrical realism, because the themes or the scripts were focused more on everyday reality than of some philosophical kind of doctrine of some enigmatic religious scripture. So that was for you. Then, so in summary, it made way to this drama of manners, not of course of morals. This is in fact not comedy of poor villages. This comedy of drawing rooms. Again, the setting is of noble families, court gossip, the story. That is why perhaps commoners were driven out, because the scriptures were written, staged for elite class, and they also the stories revolved around some upper class of society. Courtroom gossips and drawing room comedies, sexual intrigue. So in this place, what is more important is marriage is not seen as a romance or presented as a romance, but as a business. So here, adultery uh, is not a tragedy, it is an entertainment, because in Puritan, adultery was a sin. But in Restoration era, adultery can be kind of performed on stage and would be laughed at, and uh, a cuckold husband would be ridiculed. Cuckold means husband of somebody who appears helpless and willfully allow his wife to perhaps practice that adultery for various reasons, for his inability to perhaps satisfy her, all different reasons. Such were brought onto the stage. So you can ask yourself, is this comedy immoral or brutally honest? That was a question to ponder over. And you can tell me if what do you think? If this kind of comedy is immoral or brutally honest, what do you feel? That's the question I asked. Because it actually, comedy of manners does not teach any virtue. It dissects hypocrisy, which means it brings to the fore, it just reveals the hypocrisy of the society. So, if you want to understand what is comedy of manners, the definition: drama that satirizes social behavior. So, that attacks, or makes fun of, or directs a strong, ironical, kind of comment. Focus on elite society, that is a feature of comedy of manners. So, the things that would be perhaps the part of such scriptures or plays or marriage, money, reputation, sex, these themes dominate the plays that belong to this genre, comedy of manner. And here, instead of the characters in the play, the society itself becomes the hero, because the focus is more on society than on a single character.